When it comes to Dragon Ball matchups, there are a few familiar faces that always seem to show up. Goku versus Gohan, Gohan versus Vegeta, and even Broly versus just about anyone. But one pairing that almost never enters the conversation is Gohan versus Trunks. And that's surprising, considering both are iconic Half Saiyan warriors with their own legacies. Part of the reason this duel gets overlooked likely comes down to Trunks' limited screen time. Unlike the rest of the cast, Future Trunks only really plays a central role twice. Once when he first appears to warn the Z-Fighters about the androids, and again during his arc in Dragon Ball Super. But there's a lesser known chapter of his story that gets far less mentioned. In the timeline, separate from the main events, Trunks went through his own version of the Majin Buu saga. It's within this alternate struggle that he's believed to have unlocked the Super Saiyan 2 transformation, an important factor in gauging his strength in any versus debate. In this video, we'll be focusing on that pre-Super Saiyan version of Future Trunks after he has endured his own post-apocalyptic growth. But before the Goku Black arc ever begins. His challenger? None other than the newly awakened Super Saiyan 2 Gohan from the Cell games. The version of Gohan who finally snapped after witnessing the death of Android 16. Two characters, two completely different upbringings, two different versions of Super Saiyan 2 forged under vastly different circumstances. We'll explore how they stack up against each other and break down both the anime and manga interpretations of Trunks' path to power. If you enjoy conversations like this and want to take part in deeper Dragon Ball discussions, I highly encourage you to join the Dragon Ball HQ Discord server. Link is below in the description. We'll be diving into this topic and more over there. Now, without further delay, let's begin. To properly examine any battle involving Cell Games era Gohan, it's crucial to first understand just how legendary that moment was in terms of raw power. Super Saiyan 2 made his dramatic debut when Gohan snapped in the face of unbearable loss, and the strength he tapped into shocked even the gods of that era. In fact, Gohan's peak at the Cell Games was so monumental that it went unmatched for nearly a decade in Dragon Ball time. It wasn't until Goku's return from the afterlife during the Buu saga when Majin Vegeta acknowledged that Goku and Super Saiyan 2 had surpassed Gohan that fans were even shown a higher plateau. Piccolo himself later has doubts watching Majin Vegeta face off with Fat Buu, unsure whether Vegeta's growth had actually eclipsed Gohan entirely. That just goes to show how dominant Gohan's original Super Saiyan 2 was, setting the bar that stood untouched throughout most of Dragon Ball Z. The other end of this hypothetical clash, we have Future Trunks. The last time we saw him prior to the Super era, he had just destroyed the androids and Cell in his own timeline, but he was still far below the likes of Goku during the Cell games. In fact, during that arc, it was made abundantly clear. Even with his third grade Super Saiyan bulked up form, Trunks couldn't touch the calm and refined power Goku was wielding as a mastered Super Saiyan. Back then, Goku was recognized as the strongest of the Z-Fighters at least before Gohan revealed his true potential. Cell himself acknowledged the difference when he saw Gohan's energy firsthand, confirming that Goku's warnings about his son weren't just empty words. So, with that established, the climb Trunks would have had to make ever to contend with Gohan's Cell Games peak is a steep one. When Dragon Ball Super revisits Trunks in the manga, we're shown glimpses of how he trained during his world's version of the Buu era. Notably, he's depicted wielding and mastering the Z-Sword, something Gohan also did in the main timeline. In Gohan's case, using the sword increases physical strength, though Goku is unsure if it would have been enough to overcome Fat Buu at the time. We don't get an exact multiplier, but it's safe to say that the Z-Sword offered some degree of measurable boost. Trunks gaining that same enhancement suggests that he did receive a similar boost in strength, but even with this, he's shown struggling during a pivotal encounter with Dabura. During the clash with Dabura, Trunks initially fails to match him, clearly still operating in his base Super Saiyan form. However, when the Supreme Kai's life is in danger, Trunks undergoes a powerful, emotional-driven surge, mirroring the very same emotional trigger that led Gohan to achieve Super Saiyan 2. In a flash, his power explodes, and he not only turns the tide of the fight, but finishes off Dabura with the Kai's help. Now, here's the interesting comparison. In the Buu saga, Gohan also fought Dabura, but the results were inconclusive. According to both Goku and Vegeta at the time, Gohan had weakened since the Cell games and his fighting instincts had dulled. He lost his power in both intensity and application. The context is important though. While Trunks does defeat Dabura, it's not the same Dabura Gohan fought at full strength, nor is it the same version of Gohan who obliterated Cell. At first glance, Dabura might seem like an odd measuring stick in the Dragon Ball universe, but when it comes to power comparisons during the Buu saga, he's surprisingly a critical benchmark. Multiple sources, including the Daizenshu and anime dialogue, place him around the same level as Super Perfect Cell, if not slightly higher. What makes him even more dangerous is his mastery of sorcery, granting him an extra utility beyond raw strength. Now, the fight between Dabura and Gohan in Dragon Ball Z has been a topic of fierce debate for years, especially when it comes to Gohan's form during that battle. Was he actually using Super Saiyan 2? The visual cues are inconsistent and the electricity aura isn't always clearly shown. It's in my personal opinion that Gohan was a Super Saiyan 2, but I'm not mad if you think he wasn't. Regardless, what we do know is that Gohan and Dabura are portrayed as roughly equal in that exchange. When Trunks faces off against Dabura though in the Dragon Ball Super manga, the outcome is different. Though Kaioshin does step in to assist, Trunks delivers the final blow, and unlike Gohan's drawn out duel, Dabura is decisively defeated. Which raises the question if Trunks surpassed the version of Gohan that fought Dabura, and there are many strong arguments to say that he did. First off, Trunks' attack wasn't just a grazing shot, Dabura was outright killed. The implication is that Trunks had enough raw power to put him down for good, something Gohan couldn't manage during his clash. On top of that, Trunks was fresh off intense solo training with the Z-Sword and likely remained far more active as a fighter compared to Gohan, who had largely fallen out of practice. Which brings us to one of the central issues, Gohan's conditioning during the Dabura fight. After 7 years of peace, Gohan's strength had regressed, at least in terms of combat sharpness. Both Goku and Vegeta comment on his lack of intensity and fighting edge. Official guidebooks also note that Gohan's ability to access his latent fury, his defining trait in the Cell games, had faded over time. That inner fire, often referred to as hidden potential, was the key to Gohan's overwhelming victories as a teenager. It's important to clarify though that the base level of strength he had during the Cell games didn't necessarily drop. Some material suggests that Gohan's base power remained close to what it was in his youth, but the explosive rage he once relied on was no longer available to tap into. This lines up with the observation while he was still strong enough to fight Dabura, he wasn't overwhelming him like he did with Cell in the past. During the Cell games, Gohan wasn't just stronger than Cell, he was vastly superior by the end, and when he finally stopped holding back in the final beam struggle, his power overwhelmed Cell with such force that Gohan literally walked right through him. The level of dominance wasn't replicated in this fight with Dabura, however, which further supports the idea that he had lost access to the very thing that made him unbeatable back then. Now compare that to future Trunks, who despite being younger and less naturally gifted, defeated Dabura without relying on a rage boost. At least, it seemed that way. Which is pretty significant. It means Trunks either surpassed the weakened Gohan from that era of the Buu saga or simply was more efficient and combat ready due to his circumstances. Either way, the implication is pretty clear. Trunks during the post-Z-Sword phase may have stepped into a territory once reserved for Gohan alone. Not necessarily Cell Games Gohan at his peak, but certainly the dulled version of him seen during the early Buu saga. And given that Dabura's strength is comparable to Cell, that places Trunks in a very interesting power tier, and one where he would beat Gohan from the Buu saga pretty confidently. However, when it comes to comparing this version of Trunks in the manga to Gohan during the Cell games, it doesn't quite hold up. For one, Trunks didn't defeat Dabura solo. Supreme Kai provided assistance, and while Trunks did land the finishing blow, context does matter. Gohan, had he trained and regained his Cell games level strength during the Buu saga, would have easily dispatched Dabura, and this comment is supported by Vegeta and Goku. The only characters that really start to surpass Gohan at that point in the saga is Majin Vegeta and Super Saiyan 2 Goku. So it even stands to reason that Gohan, who annihilated Cell with the casual beam struggle, still outclasses the version of Trunks seen in the manga, regardless of the win over Dabura. The other thing with Trunks' win over Dabura is it's possible that his baseline Super Saiyan 2 strength isn't what did it, but it was in fact actually due to rage. Ever since Vegeta's My Bulma moment or Goku's outburst against Goku Black during Dragon Ball Super, the series has leaned heavily into Rage Boost power-ups for everyone, not just Gohan. This is no longer an exclusive trait, and it's very possible that Trunks in that moment might have received a massive emotional spike when fighting Dabura, pushing him beyond his normal limits temporarily, which would mean that his base Super Saiyan 2 form might actually be weaker than it seemed during that kill shot. Though either way, the feats just don't compare to Gohan. Even without a rage boost, Super Saiyan 2 Trunks beating Dabura doesn't necessarily scale him to Cell Games level Gohan, since he would be massively stronger than Dabura. So when it comes to the case of the manga, I'd give it to Gohan pretty handily. Now the anime paints a slightly different picture. Trunks' own narration refers to his battle with Dabura as a tough and drawn out conflict. That implies that regardless of the result, it wasn't a clear-cut domination. The animation shows him finishing the fight with what appears to be a basic Super Saiyan transformation though, since there's an absence of lightning and visual cues to confirm if it's Super Saiyan 2 or not. It's easy to assume that it was Super Saiyan 2 to match the manga story, but the anime and manga operate under different rules during this timeline in Dragon Ball Super, and there's no guarantee of consistency. Still, the fact does remain that Trunks referred to it as a hard-fought battle, so even if he wasn't Super Saiyan, he's basically telling you that the fight was very hard for him to win. So if he was twice as strong, maybe it wouldn't have been so hard fought. Though some people do believe that Gohan was even with Dabura in just Super Saiyan, so it really just depends on how you want to interpret what forms they're using during this fight. But regardless of the fact, I think Gohan is still the definitive winner. If anything, the match feels a little lopsided. Whether Trunks was in Super Saiyan 2 or not, the odds aren't in his favor, and in most scenarios, he's likely getting outclassed, making this fight pretty unfair.